Berlin, February 1945. The city is burning, the radios are silent, and Joseph Goebbels, the man who once claimed he could shape reality itself, stares at a ruined empire built on his own words. For years, he was portrayed as the genius behind Hitler's propaganda machine, a cold architect who controlled the minds of millions. But when the archives finally opened, another truth emerged. His power was fragile, his influence was exaggerated, and his own lies eventually swallowed him whole. Fact 1. The propagandist who believed his own lies. Joseph Goebbels is often remembered as a brilliant manipulator, a man capable of bending an entire nation to Hitler's will. But the record shows something far more dangerous. He wasn't simply telling lies, he was building a world he desperately needed to believe was real. By the late 1930s, Goebbels was already losing control over the information he claimed to command. Reports from regional Gauleiters contradicted the rosy image he broadcast. Secret police memos warned that morale was slipping, food shortages were spreading, and trust in the regime was thinning. But Goebbels refused to believe these documents, calling them defeatist distortions, even when they came from Nazi officials themselves. Instead of adjusting his message, he doubled down, creating an alternate Germany, a place of endless victories, loyal citizens, and inevitable triumph. This wasn't strategic brilliance, it was self-delusion masquerading as strength. During the war, his detachment only deepened. By 1943, when Stalingrad collapsed, Goebbels crafted speeches insisting the Reich was entering a new phase of heroic resistance, even as internal polls showed the public knew defeat was coming. He ignored them, insisting that faith creates reality. The tragedy was that he genuinely believed it. His propaganda stopped being a tool of control and became a lifeline he clung to, a shield against the truth he could no longer stand to face. What many historians now agree on is simple. Goebbels wasn't a mastermind engineering the thoughts of millions. He was a believer trapped in his own mythology, a man mistaking his fantasies for strategy. And in the end, the empire he claimed he could protect with words alone dissolved around him, because the one person he managed to convince most completely was himself. Fact 2. The master strategist who lost control of his own ministry. Joseph Goebbels liked to present himself as the architect of a perfectly organized propaganda empire. But archival records paint a different picture. His ministry was chaotic, divided, and constantly bypassed by more powerful Nazi institutions. By the late 1930s, Goebbels no longer controlled the flow of information inside the Reich, the way later myths suggested. The SS issued its own reports. The Wehrmacht controlled military news. The Foreign Office filtered international coverage. Even regional party leaders crafted their own, local propaganda, often directly contradicting Goebbels' official line. Internal memoranda show him pleading for discipline and unity of messaging, a sign that the system he claimed to command was slipping away from him. During the war, this fragmentation became even clearer. Goebbels wanted to maintain a single narrative of strength, but military censors, who did not answer to him, blocked his attempts to shape battlefield reporting. Diaries from his own staff record moments of deep frustration, describing meetings where Goebbels pounded his desk because no one listens to the minister anymore. The regime's propaganda was not a perfectly tuned machine under one man's control. It was competing voices, rival agencies, and personal egos fighting for attention in an increasingly desperate state. And when the air raids intensified, Goebbels discovered something he never prepared for. The German public no longer believed him. Rumors spread faster than his broadcasts could counter them. Letters intercepted by censors showed a population quietly ignoring his speeches. The myth of the mastermind collapses here. Goebbels didn't manage the narrative. He chased it, always one step behind a war he could not shape and a reality he could not suppress. Fact 3. The propaganda that failed. Where it mattered most. One of the greatest myths surrounding Goebbels is that he successfully deceived the German people until the very end. But the truth, documented in secret morale reports, is that his propaganda began failing long before Berlin fell. As early as 1941, surveys from the Sicherheitsdienst, the intelligence arm of the SS, showed a sharp decline in public trust. Citizens no longer believed official casualty figures. Soldiers returning from the Eastern Front quietly described disasters that Goebbels claimed were glorious advances. Housewives compared ration shortages to the promises made on the radio. Step by step, the real world exposed the gap between Goebbels' message and people's lived experience. By 1943, after the defeat at Stalingrad, the collapse of belief became impossible to hide. In one striking report, a regional party official admitted, "The people know more than the minister allows himself to say." Goebbels responded by intensifying propaganda output, more speeches, more films, more slogans, believing volume could replace credibility. But each new message only widened the gap between reality and rhetoric. The total war speech in Berlin, widely portrayed today as a moment of genius, was in fact a reaction to widespread despair he could no longer mask. It wasn't strategic brilliance, it was panic disguised as resolve. In private, Goebbels sensed the failure. His diary shows flashes of anger toward a public he called weak and ungrateful for refusing to believe what he insisted was true. But belief cannot be maintained by force, and by 1944, the German people listened to British radio broadcasts more than their own state stations. That is the ultimate contradiction. The supposed master propagandist presided over a communication system the public had already abandoned. Goebbels didn't keep Germany loyal. Germany endured despite him, until it simply couldn't anymore. Fact 4. The man who mistook cruelty for intelligence. Goebbels' reputation as a genius often comes from his talent for manipulating emotion. But when the archives are read closely, his approach was astonishingly simple and shockingly crude. He relied on the same tools again and again: fear, blame, hatred, and endless repetition. What some later observers mistook for brilliance was merely brutality delivered loudly and without pause. His speeches followed predictable patterns. Each one created an enemy, amplified fear, and demanded obedience. Early on, these methods were effective in a traumatized nation still reeling from economic collapse and political chaos. But as living conditions improved in the late 1930s, Goebbels' emotional tactics began to lose power. He responded not with adaptation, but escalation. This inability to evolve defined his career. While other propagandists worldwide experimented with subtle influence, Goebbels doubled down on confrontation. He underestimated the intelligence of ordinary Germans, assuming they would never question a message repeated with enough aggression. He believed that if he spoke long enough and loud enough, skepticism would simply evaporate. But as the war progressed, people's tolerance for fear-based messaging collapsed. The more desperate his tone became, the more obvious the manipulation grew. Inside the ministry, younger staffers quietly criticized his outdated style, calling it a hammer used where a scalpel was needed. Foreign anti-Nazi broadcasts mocked him regularly, and German civilians, risking punishment, tuned in anyway, preferring a dangerous truth to an official lie. Goebbels interpreted this not as a failure of his methods, but as weakness in the population, further proving his inability to understand the people he claimed to influence. The myth of the brilliant minister dissolves here. His propaganda was not sophisticated, nuanced, or adaptive. It was rigid, violent, and rooted in contempt. What looked like intelligence was simply a man mistaking emotional cruelty for strategic insight. A man who thought fear could hold a nation together even as everything around him began to fall apart. Fact 5. The cultural visionary, who didn't understand culture at all. Goebbels often portrayed himself as the guardian of German art and culture, a man with refined taste guiding a nation toward ideological purity. But the private correspondence of writers, filmmakers, musicians, and even Nazi officials reveals a more embarrassing truth. Goebbels didn't understand the cultural world he claimed to command. He tried to shape cinema, theater, music, and literature with a rigid, ideological blueprint that smothered creativity and suffocated the very culture he pretended to elevate. Directors complained that scripts approved by ministry censors were lifeless and repetitive. Actors whispered about the absurd restrictions that dictated how they should speak, dress, or gesture. Composers described the ministry as a graveyard of imagination, where every melody needed political authorization. Goebbels' own attempts at writing were considered mediocre even by his allies. His novel, Michael, which he desperately wanted to be seen as a masterpiece, was quietly mocked in party circles for its overwrought style and shallow emotional logic. He tried to force the German film industry into the mold of his own personal taste, which leaned toward melodramatic fantasies and moral lectures. The result was a cinema that audiences found predictable and dull. Many chose foreign films when they could find them, or simply stopped attending screenings altogether. What historians now note is simple. Goebbels wasn't shaping culture. He was strangling it. He replaced diversity with uniformity, curiosity with obedience, and creative risk with ideological safety. His propaganda ministry didn't produce a vibrant national culture. It produced a controlled, brittle imitation of one, a cultural facade that collapsed the moment the Reich fell. Far from being a visionary, Goebbels was a man who mistook censorship for creativity and control for expression, leaving behind a hollow cultural landscape that never recovered during the war years. Fact 6. The people's voice. Who feared the people. Goebbels liked to present himself as the man closest to the German public, the minister who understood their feelings, fears, and desires. But private reports from regional officials reveal a striking contradiction. Goebbels was terrified of the public's real opinions. He depended obsessively on secret police surveys, morale briefings, and intercepted letters because he knew that his speeches alone couldn't control the national mood. In fact, he spent more time reading classified reports than writing propaganda. These documents, kept hidden from the public, showed widespread exhaustion, sarcasm toward the regime, and anger at the endless sacrifices the war demanded. In other words, Goebbels' greatest fear was the very population he claimed to speak for. When he toured bombed-out German cities, he rarely spoke to ordinary civilians. Instead, he met with carefully selected groups who repeated what officials wanted him to hear. His diary shows a pattern. He praised these staged encounters as proof of the people's unbroken loyalty and ignored everything else. Meanwhile, the actual population was turning inward, relying on rumors, foreign broadcasts, or personal experience rather than official statements. Goebbels sensed this shift, and his response was not humility or adjustment. It was anger. He complained that the German people failed to maintain proper spirit, revealing a deep resentment toward the very audience he claimed to inspire. By 1944, he openly admitted in private that the public had stopped listening. His broadcasts continued, but their tone grew harsher, more desperate, and more detached from reality. The minister who once believed himself the voice of the nation became a man shouting into an empty room. The myth of Goebbels as a master communicator collapses here. He never understood the people. He only understood how to perform for an audience he imagined, not the one that actually existed. Fact 7. The propaganda minister who couldn't control Hitler. A persistent myth claims Goebbels shaped Hitler's worldview, guiding him like a master puppeteer. But surviving records, especially Hitler's own speeches, directives, and meeting minutes, prove the opposite. Goebbels followed, he did not lead. Hitler saw himself as the true propagandist of the nation, and Goebbels admitted this privately, calling him the greatest communications talent of our time. The minister's job was not to create strategy, but to decorate Hitler's decisions. He was, in essence, the Reich's publicist, not its brain. Hitler regularly rejected Goebbels' advice, particularly during wartime. When Goebbels urged more transparency after major defeats, Hitler refused. When Goebbels pushed for earlier mass mobilization, Hitler dismissed him. When Goebbels begged for tighter control over military messaging, Hitler overruled him in favor of the Wehrmacht. Their relationship was not one of equals. It was loyalty and flattery in one direction, domination in the other. Inside the ministry, staff called Goebbels the interpreter, not the architect. He translated Hitler's ideology into slogans and speeches, but he did not shape the ideology itself. Even Goebbels' most famous moment, the 1943 Total War speech, was an act of theatrical timing, not strategic leadership. Hitler had already decided on total war months earlier. Goebbels merely delivered the performance. The myth of Goebbels as mastermind serves one purpose. It makes Hitler seem less responsible. But the truth is simpler and more troubling. Hitler did not need a genius beside him. He needed a loyal executor who believed in him completely. Goebbels filled that role. His power came from obedience, not brilliance. And the more he submitted, the smaller he became in the eyes of the regime he dedicated his life to serving. Fact 8. The minister who fought reality. Until the very end. As the Reich collapsed, most senior officials tried to save themselves, fleeing, negotiating, or quietly distancing their legacy from the crimes of the regime. But Goebbels did something different, something revealing. He clung to the fantasy he had built for 12 years. Even as Berlin lay in ruins, even when entire armies were gone, even when Hitler himself retreated into silence, Goebbels insisted that miracles were coming. He circulated reports of imaginary counteroffensives. He spread rumors of secret weapons that no longer existed. He pressured radio announcers to speak of a victory that both he and they knew was impossible. His final months were not a display of loyalty. They were a final collapse into delusion. Inside the bunker, Goebbels still drafted propaganda bulletins even when there was no functioning press. He rehearsed speeches that no one would hear. He wrote diary entries insisting that history would vindicate him. None of this was strategic. It was psychological retreat. Somewhere along the way, Goebbels stopped serving the regime and began serving the myth of Joseph Goebbels, his imagined identity as a man who never surrendered, never doubted, never broke. But history shows he broke long before the end. His final broadcasts were hollow echoes of a world already gone. His speeches were delivered to empty streets, powerless transmitters, and a population trying to survive the rubble. The man who once tried to shape reality now denied it entirely. And when he realized the truth could no longer be outrun, he chose self-destruction rather than confrontation. There was no genius in this ending, only a man trapped inside his own story, unable to accept the world as it really was. Fact 9. The media genius who never understood the modern world. Goebbels is often credited with pioneering modern media strategy, but when historians examined his methods, a different picture emerged. He misunderstood how information spreads when people are scared, starving, and angry. His approach, broadcast more, censor harder, punish doubt, failed in a society where daily life contradicted every official message. By 1944, German families trusted word of mouth more than radio, diaries more than newspapers, and foreign broadcasts more than anything Goebbels produced. He failed to anticipate the simplest human truth. When reality becomes unbearable, propaganda loses power. Goebbels clung to the old tools, speeches, slogans, moral lectures, while the world shifted beneath him. He could speak endlessly, but he no longer had an audience. The modern communications revolution, fast rumors, private conversations, informal networks, made his ministry obsolete. His legacy isn't that he mastered media, but that he misunderstood how fragile control becomes when reality outpaces ideology. His methods didn't shape the future of propaganda. They exposed its limits. Fact 10. The man who built a personality cult. For himself, Goebbels spent years constructing an image of himself as indispensable: the brilliant orator, the loyal disciple, the cultural guardian, the architect of unity. But internal Nazi correspondence shows how his colleagues actually viewed him: ambitious, insecure, manipulative, and constantly exaggerating his own role. Generals distrusted him. Party officials avoided him. Even Hitler used him, selectively, praising him in public, but frequently sidelining him in private. Goebbels crafted his own myth through staged photos, carefully written diary entries, and speeches emphasizing his unwavering devotion. He wanted history to see him as second only to Hitler. But his colleagues saw something else. A man desperate for significance in a hierarchy that never truly accepted him. His self-created legend survived mostly because he wrote it himself. Once the war ended and real documents surfaced, the truth became clear. Goebbels didn't build the Nazi propaganda state. He built a mirror, one that reflected only the version of himself he wanted the world to see. Fact 11. The master of manipulation. Who was easily manipulated. Despite his reputation, Goebbels was remarkably vulnerable to flattery. Those who knew him understood how to shape his decisions, praise his intellect, reference his historic mission, and he would bend. Hitler mastered this early. Whenever Goebbels pushed for policy changes, Hitler offered a compliment, told him he was indispensable, and sent him back to the ministry empty-handed but grateful. Foreign diplomats observed a similar pattern. Journalists who praised German films often received access. Artists who complimented his writing were granted protection. Even local party officials learned that a few ego-stroking letters could open ministry funds. Goebbels believed he was manipulating others, but in reality, he was the easiest person in the regime to influence. His deepest fear, being insignificant, made him predictable. His myth claims he controlled minds across a nation. The truth is quieter. He was a man who needed constant validation, and those around him used that need to guide him like a rudder. His power was real, but his self-awareness was not. Fact 12. The propagandist who couldn't escape his own propaganda. By the final days of the Third Reich, Goebbels was trapped inside the world he spent years constructing. He no longer distinguished between the image he projected and the reality collapsing around him. He believed Germany would rise again because he needed it to. He believed loyalty was noble because betrayal terrified him. He believed his words could outlive defeat because silence was unbearable. In the bunker, he kept writing, entries filled with certainty even as the walls shook from artillery fire. He spoke of future generations who would vindicate him, as if history itself was another audience waiting for his direction. But when Berlin fell, there was no audience left. His broadcasts stopped. His children slept a final night. And the man who spent his life telling others what to believe chose the only ending that required no explanation, no accountability, no truth. His final act wasn't loyalty to Hitler. It was loyalty to the myth of Joseph Goebbels, the story he built, and could not live without. And in the end, that myth died with him. Goebbels built his reputation on the illusion of power, but the record shows a smaller, more fragile man. One undone not by enemies, but by the lies he needed to believe. His myth collapses easily because it was never built on truth, only on words.